Reality is not what most people think it is. We assume it's this hard, immovable, external force that dictates the limits of our lives. But that assumption itself is the first mistake. What you call reality is not fixed, it is negotiated through the filter of your perception. Every single day, you are bombarded with billions of bits of sensory data, and yet your mind only allows in a tiny fraction of that information. What you notice, what you focus on, and what you assign meaning to, that is what becomes real for you. Reality isn't just out there, it's built in here, in your perception, before you ever act. And if perception is the gateway to reality, then manifestation is simply the process of consciously shaping that gateway instead of letting it be hijacked by fear, doubt, and inherited limitations. Think of it this way: two people can walk into the exact same room, stand in the exact same conditions, and one sees opportunity while the other sees failure waiting to happen. The room hasn't changed, the interpretation has. The first person will move forward, test possibilities, risk the discomfort of failure, and, by acting, turn vague potential into tangible results. The second person will retreat, convinced that the environment is against them, and in doing so, create the very failure they feared. Which of them is experiencing reality? Both. But they are radically different realities produced by perception. This is what most people refuse to accept. Manifestation is not about conjuring miracles out of thin air, it's about understanding that your interpretation shapes your reality long before external events confirm it. Now, why is this simple idea so difficult to practice? Because it demands responsibility. If reality is partly constructed through your perception, then every limitation you cling to is, at least in part, your choice. That's unbearable for many people to admit. It's much easier to believe that the universe is indifferent, that the system is rigged, that your fate is already sealed. Those beliefs let you off the hook. You don't have to change how you think, you don't have to confront the fear that maybe you've been creating the very obstacles that trap you. To acknowledge that perception negotiates reality is to admit that you have agency, and agency always comes with the unbearable weight of responsibility. This is where quantum manifestation begins. You feel something, you believe something, you act as if it's already true, and your perception organizes itself to support that belief. You start noticing patterns you would have ignored before, you recognize opportunities that were invisible when you were consumed by doubt, and you behave in ways that draw people and circumstances into alignment with what you expect. Is this mystical? No, it's psychological. It's brutally simple, but simplicity doesn't make it easy. Most people don't fail at manifestation because it's too complex. They fail because it asks them to abandon the comforting illusion that reality is fixed and to accept the terrifying truth that it bends, constantly, around what they perceive and feel to be real. Thoughts alone are weak. People like to believe that by simply thinking about success, happiness, or wealth, they are manifesting it. But the truth is, the mind doesn't move reality with detached thoughts. It moves reality through feeling. Emotion is the language of the subconscious, and it is the subconscious that governs the patterns of your behavior, your perception, and ultimately the results that appear in your life. When you feel something deeply, when it isn't just an idea floating in your head but an experience flooding through your body, your subconscious takes it as real. That is why you can't just tell yourself you're confident, or abundant, or disciplined, you have to feel it. Without emotion, a thought is like a seed tossed on stone, it never grows into anything alive. Think about how memory works. You don't vividly remember most of the thousands of thoughts you had last year, but you remember the moments that carried emotion. The heartbreak, the joy, the fear, the triumph. Why? Because emotion sears experience into your nervous system. The same principle drives manifestation. When a thought is fused with feeling, it becomes a command to the subconscious: organize reality to match this. If your emotions are saturated with fear, you'll notice threats everywhere. If your emotions are saturated with gratitude and possibility, you'll notice opportunities. The world hasn't changed, the emotional lens through which you experience it has. This is where most people go wrong. They think they can outsmart life with affirmations, with positive thinking alone, but their body is radiating fear, doubt, and insecurity. They are repeating words that their subconscious doesn't believe, so nothing changes. The subconscious does not care about words, it responds to what you truly feel. If you say, "I'm successful," but every fiber of your being feels unworthy, what command is actually being sent? Not success, not abundance, it's rejection, and life, through your own actions and perceptions, reflects that back to you. That is why it's not enough to know something intellectually. You can read books about courage, watch videos about discipline, or study theories about abundance, but until you allow yourself to feel the reality of those qualities, they remain abstractions. Feeling is rehearsal for reality. When you imagine and actually generate the emotional state of already living the life you desire, your subconscious begins aligning your habits, your speech, your posture, your decisions to that vision. Slowly, what once felt imagined becomes normal. But why don't people do this? Because feeling requires vulnerability. To feel something is real before it exists demands courage. It means risking disappointment. It means admitting you care so much about what you want that you're willing to emotionally commit to it before there's any evidence. And that terrifies people, so they stay in their head, analyzing, planning, endlessly thinking, but never daring to feel. Thought without feeling is safe, but it's also powerless. Manifestation only begins when you allow your emotions to carry the thought from abstraction into lived, embodied reality. Most people live as if life owes them something. They wait, watching the world, hoping that circumstances will shift, that luck will intervene, that someone else will open the door they are too afraid to knock on. But this is the trap. They outsource agency. Instead of taking responsibility for shaping reality, they place the burden on the universe, the government, the family, or fate itself. Manifestation is simple: act as though it's already real. Yet hardly anyone does this, because the cost of taking responsibility is too heavy for them to bear. To truly accept that your choices, your habits, your words, and your emotions are building the reality you inhabit is to strip yourself of excuses, and that terrifies people more than failure itself. You can see this everywhere. People complain about their circumstances but make no attempt to alter the routines that sustain those very circumstances. They want financial freedom but refuse to discipline their spending. They want love but avoid the vulnerability required to build trust. They want health but reject the discomfort of consistent effort. And then, when their desires don't materialize, they claim that manifestation doesn't work. But manifestation works relentlessly. It always works, because the reality you're living right now is the product of what you've consistently acted on in the past. If you want a different reality, you must accept the brutal truth: you are the architect of the one you already have. Why does this terrify people? Because once you admit you have power, you also admit you're responsible for your failures. And it is easier, far easier, to say, the world is unfair, than it is to say, I didn't show up as I should have. The first allows you to remain passive, the second demands transformation. Manifestation is not difficult in principle. It asks you to take ownership of your inner state, to align thought, feeling, and action, and to live as if what you want already belongs to you. But that is psychologically brutal, because it leaves you nowhere to hide. If you fail, it's on you. If you succeed, it's also on you. Most people choose the comfort of blame over the burden of agency. There is also an addiction to waiting. Waiting feels safe. You can always convince yourself that when conditions improve, then you'll act. But conditions rarely improve on their own. They improve because someone stops waiting and starts moving. Acting as if it's already real doesn't mean being delusional. It means aligning your behavior with the reality you claim to want. It means living responsibly in the present, so that the future has no choice but to reflect your effort. In the end, people don't fail at manifestation because it's complicated. They fail because it is simple, and simplicity removes excuses. You don't get to hide behind complexity. You either take responsibility and step into agency, or you hand it away and live chained to circumstances. That is the real reason most never manifest the life they want, not because they can't, but because they won't. Manifestation is so often misunderstood as if it were nothing more than wishful thinking, as if repeating a phrase or sitting still with a vision board will suddenly bend reality into compliance. That's the fantasy, and it's why so many people dismiss the idea altogether. But manifestation has never been about idle wishing. It's about order emerging from intentional action. The truth is simple: probability collapses into actuality when intention is crystallized into disciplined behavior. You don't manifest by dreaming, you manifest by structuring your life in accordance with what you believe is possible. Without that structure, your dreams remain nothing but scattered clouds of potential, never solidifying into form. Think about how chaos operates. Left unchecked, it multiplies. In thought, in your habits, in your environment, chaos grows in the absence of order. When you allow your days to be dictated by impulse, distraction, or laziness, you are not neutral. You are reinforcing chaos. Manifestation requires the opposite: clarity of vision and consistency of action. You take the desire you felt, the belief you've chosen, and you give it bones through routine, discipline, and structure. yourself. Or to demand
Pięć ramion
sacrifice. To
gwiazdy,
move from wishful
zmysłów
thinking to
pięć
manifestation,
i
you have to
pięć
cut away what is in the
kwiatowych
mind.
płatków.
You can't want health while
Miłosny
clinging to destructive
smęt i
habits. You
wspólna
can't want
chęć
abundance while entertaining beliefs of
nieskończonego
scarcity. You
upadku.
can't want meaningful relationships while avoiding
Jak
the
wśród
responsibility of
gwiazd,
honesty and
co
accountability.
włókaz
The
zgasł
act of
i
disciplining yourself to
białe
act as though the
smugi
reality you want
miedzie,
already exists forces you
spadnijmy
to
w
confront
dół,
the chaos within you,
objęci
the
w pół.
procrastination, the fear, the distraction, and the
Niżej,
limiting. Most people won't do this, not because they can't, but because it's uncomfortable. They'd rather preserve their comfort
niż
than embrace the
wszystko
discomfort that leads to
w
transformation.
świecie.
Here's the paradox. Manifestation looks mysterious from the outside, but on the inside, it's often nothing more than vigorous consistency. If you want something, you align your daily behavior with it until reality has no option but to comply. That's not magic, that's cause and effect. Yet people prefer the fantasy of magic because magic excuses them from discipline. It lets them dream without paying the price. Discipline makes the invisible visible, but it demands everything from you: time, energy, commitment, sacrifice. And that price is what most people will not pay. So when we say manifestation is simple, we don't mean it is easy. It's simple because the principle is clear.
Złamać się,
Intention plus disciplined
klęknąć,
action
nie
equals reality.
dojść.
But
Za
simplicity
wielki
has a way of
sen
cutting
i
through
żal.
illusions, and many
My
would rather
chcemy
cling to
paść,
illusions than accept the clarity of
bezwładnie
responsibility.
paść w skroś
Manifestation
czarnej
is not about
ziemi
wishing,
w
it's about structure. It's about putting shape to possibilities so the order you
Jak
build on
wśród
itself.
gwiazd, co
Without that
włókaz
order,
zgasł
nothing changes.
i białe
Everything
smugi
does.
miedzie,
It's clever.
spadnijmy
It
w dół, objęci w
Instead,
pół.
it disguises itself in the voice of reason, in the quiet logic of caution, in the claim of being realistic. When people dismiss manifestation as foolish or
Niż
unscientific, often what
wszystko
they're really doing is
w
protecting themselves
świecie.
from the possibility of failure. Because if they were to accept that their thoughts, emotions, and actions have the power to shape reality, then they would be forced to confront the terrifying possibility that they could not, and still fall short. It is easier to hide behind rational skepticism than to stand naked before your own inadequacy. And so fear of failure masks itself as rationality. Think of how often people mock ambition. Someone declares a dream, and immediately they are told, be realistic. Don't get your hopes up. That's not how the world works. On the surface, this sounds like wisdom, but underneath, it is almost always fear. Sometimes it's their own fear, projected onto others. Sometimes it's the voice of society, trying to enforce mediocrity as a form of safety. But at its core, it is an excuse to not even attempt the climb. Because if you never climb, you never risk falling. That is why so many stay at the bottom of the mountain, convincing themselves that those who reach the summit are either lucky or dishonest. The irony is that the very act of dismissing manifestation ensures failure. By calling it unrealistic, people guarantee that their reality will remain exactly as it is. They don't even give themselves the chance to test whether it could be true for them. They would rather be certain in their misery than risk uncertainty in pursuit of transformation. This is the psychology of self-sabotage. The fear of failure is so unbearable that it convinces the mind to label possibility as nonsense. Better to ridicule it than to attempt it and discover your own lack of courage. But here's the uncomfortable truth: failure itself is not the real enemy. Failure teaches, it reshapes, it refines. Every successful person has failed more times than the average person has even attempted. The true enemy is the avoidance of failure, because avoidance is what keeps you static. You cannot manifest a new reality while simultaneously protecting yourself from the risk of disappointment. To manifest is to step into the unknown, to feel the fear, and to act anyway. The moment you demand certainty before you move, you've already lost.